What could be more American than living on a ranch? Hello and welcome. Welcome to Input English. In this episode, I'd like to share with you the experience of living on a ranch in Northern California. This happened many years ago, and overall it was a very, very good experience. We were living near Sacramento, and we had decided that we needed to buy a house because at the time we were renting a house, which was fine, but we wanted to buy a home. So we started looking. Now, my wife is self-described as a city girl. And so her thought process was that we would have a nice home in the city. And I always wanted to live out in the country. Always wanted to be outside the city. So we looked at a number of houses, and ultimately we bought a house outside of town on a ranch. Now, this was not a huge ranch. It was only 13 acres. It was set up as a cow-calf operation. That is, the house also had a barn. It was fenced completely, and all the basic stuff was set up for raising cattle on this as a small operation. This was described as a cow-calf operation. And with 13 acres, you could have maybe a dozen head of cattle. So we bought the house. It needed some work, but each thing that it needed was an opportunity to learn something. And we had many years of learning experiences living on that ranch. When we got the house and the ranch, there were no cattle. And the fences were not in very good repair, so you couldn't just put cattle on this little ranch because the fences were broken. So as we moved in and got settled, one of my chores on my list of things to do was to do repairs to the fences. Now, fence repair is not taught in any of the schools that I ever attended. And so I had to learn how to fix a fence. Most of our fencing was barbed wire. So the corner posts were big posts set in concrete and braced so that they would be very strong. But the posts along the fence line were just steel posts that were driven into the ground with no concrete. And then the fencing material that was stretched across all these posts was barbed wire. That is steel wire with little barbs such that if an animal were to press against it, it would cause enough pain that they would stop doing that. Barbed wire is typically used for cattle. You might say, well, what about barbed wire and horses? No, 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 no. Do not put a horse in a pasture with barbed wire. That's not a good thing to do. That horse can get injured. Don't use barbed wire around horses. What about goats? Now, goats would go through the barbed wire, so you need field fence for goats. Now, how do I know all this? Well, we had to learn all this because we were talking about getting some livestock for our little ranch. Well, let me rephrase that. I was talking about getting some livestock for our little ranch. Remember that the wife is self-described as a city girl. Very capable, but it wasn't on her long list to get animals for the pasture. No. So I went to the feed store Now, a feed store is a special kind of a store. It's a hardware store that sells all the supplies for raising livestock. And they have a great deal of information. They know a lot about that subject matter. So it's a great place for me to go to learn things. So I bought some supplies and I talked to the people at the feed store and determined what it was going to take to repair all our fences. Well, what it took was replacing some corner posts that were no longer solid. Well, that was a chore. Also, some of the steel posts on the fence line needed to be replaced, and a lot of the wire needed to be replaced. A lot of the barbed wire needed to be replaced. And so I had to learn how to do all those things. It was fabulous. And it took quite a long time, months. When all the fences were repaired, they were barbed wire. What that meant was if I was going to get livestock for our little ranch, it was not going to be horses and it was not going to be goats or sheep because we had barbed wire, and barbed wire is not good for goats and sheep. Now, if I wanted to raise sheep on this ranch, I would have to make some big changes. I would have to replace all this barbed wire fence, or some of it, with field fence, which is squares. Instead of individual wires, it's squares. It's actually a woven material so that the holes in the fence are small enough that a sheep or a goat would not be able to get out. The other problem you have in Northern California if you're raising sheep or goats is predators, because you go get some livestock and you put them on your ranch and everything's fine and you feed them and take care of them, and then you come out and they're all dead. They've been killed by predators, coyotes, and other predators. So now you know why I did not get into sheep or goat farming. It would have taken a tremendous amount of work to replace all that fencing, and I would have to solve the problem of predation. That is, predators killing our stock. Well, the solution appeared initially to be cattle. Now, there are many different kinds of cattle, and I had to study up on this because all of this stuff is knowledge that was not given to me as a student in any of the schools I ever attended. But because it was all new, it was interesting, it was fun to learn about, and so that's what we did for a number of years. Cattle in the United States are raised for beef or dairy. And the different types of cattle for those two endeavors are different. The breeds that are typically used for dairy include Guernsey, Jersey, Brown Swiss, and then some other breeds. The breeds that are used for beef include Black Angus, Hereford, Shorthorns, and hybrids. There are some other breeds that are used, but those are the big ones. So the Black Angus is a big black animal. Herefords are very stocky, very muscular. They are reddish brown, and they tend to have a white face or a white head. Shorthorns are frequently brown and may have some little spots, some little patterns in their color of their fur. And they are known as being fairly docile. They're good-tempered. And if I was going to raise beef cattle, I would probably raise Shorthorns. If you take purebred Black Angus and cross that with purebred Hereford, you get a hybrid. And that cross, referred to as an F1 cross, usually produces a black animal with a white face. That type of cattle is referred to as a white face or an F1 cross. F1 cross cattle are very popular for beef production. So armed with all of this information, I decided to get into some livestock for our small ranch. I made the decision. I had purchased the necessary supplies, installing everything. I was ready to go. How many should I get? 2? 10? We only have 13 acres. How many should I get? I decided on a round number, just a round number, not worrying about the details. I decided on 50,000. Really? Yes, really. Now, by now you have figured out there's something goofy about this story, because I've been talking about barbed wire and fences and cattle, but then I came up with this crazy number of 50,000. What's with 50,000? Well, it's literally what I got. I got 50,000. But they weren't cattle. They were bees. Because the first livestock we had on our ranch were honeybees. When I came home with the beehive and the bees, and I showed them to my wife, that was the day I discovered that although she harbored very few fears, she was not fond of bees. And the idea of having a beehive didn't seem to her to be a good idea. It was definitely an idea, but she didn't think it was a good idea. So the way it unfolded is I installed the beehive, installed the bees, and the bees started working. We fed them for a couple of weeks until they could forage and get their hive stabilized. They found wildflowers. We had a very healthy hive, and I would check on it, and I could see that they were making honey and putting it in the comb, and they had a brood section. They were raising new bees, and so that worked out really well. We raised bees for many years. Tending the bees was fun. As you probably know, you can get a hat with a screen to protect you from bee stings and gloves. And they teach you at the bee store to maybe wear white because that apparently is less alarming to the bees. And they sell you a little device that blows smoke. The smoke tends to make the bees docile without harming them. And so we raised bees, and they made honey, and every year we would take the honey frames out of the hive and remove the honey and filter it and put it in jars, put a label on it. We never sold them. We gave them away as gifts. And raising bees was fun. When we started raising bees, there was the natural fear of getting stung. And of course, I realized that if we were going to raise bees, I was going to get stung. If someone had a severe allergy to bee stings, raising bees would not be a good idea, but that was not the case In my case, it would just be the discomfort of the bee sting, not a severe medical emergency or allergic reaction. And I did get stung, not very often. After our hive was thriving and doing well, my kids came to visit from the Midwest. They usually spend a couple of months with us in the summer, and it was their time to come. So I had a hat with a net, and I had gloves for 2 people, but there were 2 kids and me and 1 hive. So I had to figure out how to show these kids the way the hive worked, but I didn't have enough protective gear for all 3 of us. Well, you know how that worked out. Each kid got a hat with the net and the gloves, and they were properly dressed, and I went without. And I handled the hive the usual way, moving deliberately, making sure I didn't put my hand down on top of a bee. I didn't want to move too quickly, just move deliberately and cautiously. And it was interesting because the kids got to see the hive right up close, and it was fascinating. They'd never seen bees right there. And of course, they were safe in their protective gear, and I was just standing there with no protection, and I did not get stung at all. Didn't happen. That was great. Now, over the years, that hive would swarm. The swarm would be, the hive would divide itself into 2 groups, each with a queen, and the old queen would be forced to leave with her share of the workers, and the new queen would be in the hive. But this swarm was homeless. It needed a place to live, and so I usually had an extra hive box with all the supplies so that when a swarm came out of the hive and was just a ball of bees on a bush or a branch, I could put that into a hive box, and then we would have another beehive. So I did that several times, and over a period of years, we wound up with 13 hives, each one producing honey and growing and thriving. The other thing that happened is our neighbors knew that we kept bees. And so whenever one of the neighbors would see a swarm, they would call us, and we would go capture the swarm and give it a place to live. So we caught a bunch of swarms, and that's how we got up to 13 hives. So looking back, keeping bees was a wonderful experience. It allowed us to learn a lot of things over a long period of time. When we moved away from the ranch, we left our beehives behind. So we don't currently have beehives, although I've thought maybe I should put one out. There are lots of wildflowers in the area near where we live, so having a beehive might just be something I do in the future. My daughter is now an adult, and she is now a beekeeper. So that initial experience of seeing the inside of a beehive and how beehives work and how magnificent bees are individually, but also as a colony, definitely resonated with her because she is a very good beekeeper now as an adult. So bees were our introduction to raising livestock in Northern California. Not what you expected, right? As I look back to our years on the ranch in Northern California, there are lots of stories that I can share with you that will be interesting and fun. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I encourage any comments below. Of course, we ask people to like and subscribe. That helps us build the channel. And I hope you join us in future videos. See you soon.